the entire world, 90% of the issues that doctors treat nowadays in Western countries are these so-called chronic diseases. 90% of the deaths are from these chronic diseases. 74% of the deaths around the world are from these chronic diseases. If you just change people's diets, the large majority of those go away. I mean, the entire world benefits from this.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show.
Welcome to the Dr. Ashley Show. I'm Dr. Ashley, and today I am so honored and so very excited to welcome Dr. Anthony Chaffee to the show. Dr. Chaffee is an American medical doctor with a health optimization practice in Australia who, over a span of over 20 years, has researched the optimal nutrition for human performance and overall health. It is his assertion that most of the so-called chronic diseases we treat as doctors are caused by the food we eat or don't eat and can be reversed with dietary changes to a species-specific diet. Specifically, he's going to talk on the carnivore diet. Dr. Chaffee, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I know you're so busy.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I would love for you to start by just sharing your story with us. You're a medical doctor, I think in neurosurgery, and you know a lot about nutrition and diet, specifically the carnivore diet. So can you share with us what led you to explore the connection between nutrition and chronic disease?
Yeah, absolutely. So I currently have a metabolic health practice where I go into health optimization, preventative care. But one of the things that you can do when you're preventing a disease, if you apply those same principles, you actually end up reversing a lot of these diseases. The same things that you're going to prevent something, or the things that you avoid that will make you prevent something, can actually bring people back as well. So that's a major part of my practice. I'm also retraining in neurosurgery as well, but I'm not done with that yet. But it is a very, very important part of my interest as a doctor. But as far as how diet and lifestyle play a role, I first discovered this because I was taking my undergraduate classes at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I took a class in cancer biology. I'd already taken botany and biology classes, already understood how plants and animals defend themselves because plants are stationary. They can't run away or fight back like animals can. So they typically use chemical defenses, basically chemical warfare, in order to stop animals and insects from eating them. They make about 1 million different defensive chemicals to stop predation. And so I knew that. But then it was never put in the context of our own human health until I was in cancer biology, and my professor started talking to us about all these different plant toxins that were actually carcinogenic and were in plants that we would typically eat on a daily basis. So all the different fruits and vegetables, spinach and broccoli, kale and everything else, were actually full of these toxins, and many of these toxins were known carcinogens. And so we were very taken aback by that. He said that they had already identified 136 known carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts. And what kid likes Brussels sprouts? Probably a good reason for that. They can taste this bitter, horrible taste, which is your brain responding to chemicals in that food and saying, hey, don't eat this. This is bad for you. That's what animals do in the wild. They're not going around eating bitter tasting leaves in plants because their brain and tongue are sophisticated machines, and they can tell them, hey, there's something bad in there. But mushrooms also had over 100 carcinogens, and all the others had dozens, if not over 100 carcinogens as well. So we were very blown away by this. And I remember thinking in my head, I was like, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he just sort of gave us a funny look. He said that he didn't eat salads and he didn't eat vegetables and he didn't let his kids eat vegetables. Then he said, plants are trying to kill you. And just left it at that. I was like, okay, forget plants. And so I stopped eating plants. I never felt better in my entire life. I was in my early 20s, and usually you never feel better than in your 20s. But then there was a hard line when I started slipping off of that. I just started saying like, well, dose makes a poison. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. And when I was in Europe playing rugby, I was 25 and a half. And I started eating chicken that had some breading on it, just little crumbs. So not much. I was thinking, well, dose makes a poison. Yeah, dose does make the poison. Then the dose is that big. So I started actually not feeling great. Still just eating meat, not eating plants, but just a little bit of crumbs on that chicken. And I couldn't figure out what it was. At 25, I felt like a superhero. At 25 and a half, I didn't. And I didn't know what the hell was going on. I thought maybe I was just getting older and that was just it. And my body was just decomposing now. And that's what we get told, that we just get past a certain age and our bodies just fall apart. And that's actually not how it's supposed to be. And so I rediscovered that years later, that humans just really are carnivores as a species. That's just the kind of animal that we are. All the best evidence shows that humans have been apex predators, top of the food chain, for over 2 million years. And apex predators are, by definition, carnivores. And while it's safe for any animal to eat meat, it is not safe for any animal to eat any plant. And you have to be very aware of which plants you're eating. And so it sort of clicked that that's what I was doing in my early 20s, was living as our biological design dictates, which is just eating meat. And I'd never felt better my entire life. And I was always trying to figure out how to get back to feeling like that. And I said, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And I just dropped them. I was never eating junk food. I've never been a junk food person. I've cooked nearly every single meal in my entire life has been a home cooked meal. I've eaten pizza maybe once every 2 years, even in college. And especially during that time I was carnivore, I didn't eat any pizza. Mm-hmm. So I was never a junk food person. I cooked all my meals. It was always, meat and fresh vegetables and maybe some fruit or something miserable like that. But, it's never processed junk. And I just by dropping the vegetables and increasing the amount of fatty meat I ate, in 2 weeks, I felt like I was 22 and a superhero again. And I just felt so good. At 38 years old, I went back and started playing rugby again and felt amazing and was able to perform at the same level I did in my early 20s. I felt better at 38 than I did at 28 playing professional rugby, but not on a carnivore diet. And so then I started thinking about this from a medical perspective, and I started looking at this from that standpoint. Biologically, we are carnivores. That's the kind of animal that we are, and we're not living as such, and we're not eating our biologically appropriate diet. So all these chronic diseases and illnesses that we have no clue what the basis for them are, all of a sudden started making sense and slotting into place, because you get these exact same diseases: obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmunity, arthritis, osteoporosis. All of these same diseases happen in other animals only when given the wrong diet or exposed to some sort of environmental toxin. So it clicked for me that we were poisoning ourselves with this inappropriate diet and not getting enough proper nutrition. I'll give an example in veterinary medicine that we know well about. I mean, everyone knows that there's signs at the zoo that says, don't feed the animals, they get very sick if they eat something else besides what they're supposed to eat. And parks have the same signs. They don't feed ducks. They can give them ducks bread. It gives them diabetes. Okay, well, what's it doing to you? We give grains and things like that, and skim milk. They used to give grains and skim milk to pigs to fatten them up. And there's papers back in the 1930s saying that the combination of grains and skim milk actually caused them to overeat even more to get the poundage up so they could get more lard out of them. What is grains and skim milk? That's breakfast cereal. And we're giving this to people by the billions every morning, and we're wondering why we have an obesity epidemic. We literally did this on purpose for centuries to fatten up pigs. And now we're the fat pigs. An example in veterinary medicine, there are a number of diseases in livestock that are actually recognized, like big head, big tongue, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome, many, many more. That they're named disease, but they're understood to not be diseases. They're understood to be when that animal is sort of caught in a pasture and they run out of forage and feed, and they start eating plants that they're not really set up to eat, and they get poisoned. So those are from plant poisons, and it doesn't kill them, but they get sick. They get these problems from these plant toxins that they're not biologically adapted to contend with. And even herbivores have to stay within a very narrow range of plants. They can't go outside of that, or they get very sick, or they can die. You get lost in the woods and you run out of food. You can't just eat any random plant. Most of them will make you sick or even kill you. The same goes for a cow. If they run out of the grasses that they normally eat or the feed that they normally eat, and they start eating other plants, they can get sick or die. And some of those diseases that I named are some of the manifestations of those toxicities. And so they figured out that these were from toxins from plants. They also found out that cows have muscular dystrophy. And it's the exact same presentation as human muscular dystrophy. But they figured it out because cows are inherently valuable, because if the cow dies, you lose money. And so it's in people's best interest to figure out what's going on and to stop it. Whereas when people get sick, it's like, the profit incentive is in actually treating those diseases as opposed to like getting you well. And so it's sort of skewed. So it's more valuable to people to keep livestock well. It's actually more valuable to keep humans sick, because then we have to pay for medicines and things like that the rest of our lives, especially with these chronic diseases. And so they figured this out. They figured out that the muscular dystrophy in cows is actually a selenium deficiency, which is a micronutrient and essential mineral that is fairly deplete in much of the farmland now around the world. And if cows don't get enough of it, they can get muscular dystrophy, at least in the genetically susceptible cows. And so, has anyone ever asked if human muscular dystrophy might be a selenium deficiency or a nutritional deficiency of some kind or another? They have no idea, absolutely no idea, but they should ask that. So you have toxicities and malnutrition. You have these animals eating the wrong thing. They're not getting the right nutritional complements, and they get these specific diseases. Yet we don't recognize diabetes, cancer, heart disease, heart failure, autoimmunity, and all these other sorts of so-called chronic diseases. We just think they just happen. We don't know what they are. But every decade they get more and more prevalent, and they get more and more common in younger and younger and younger people, right? So that's environmental. That can't be genetic. It's not just supposed to happen to us. It is abnormal. We are doing something to ourselves that is different than we used to do in previous generations, and we're getting sick as a result of that. So I think that is very clearly the exact same thing. So I think all of those so-called chronic diseases are not diseases per se. They're like in the animals. They're a combination of toxicities and malnutrition, toxic buildup of a species-inappropriate diet, and a lack of species-specific nutrition, namely too many plants that were not designed to eat and not enough meat and animal fats, which we are designed to eat and we require for a healthy life. And so when I figured all this out and I started applying this to my patient population, I started seeing reversals and recoveries from diseases that if you ask any mainstream doctor now, they will say that is impossible. That cannot be reversed. That is a chronic progressive disease that only gets worse. That's what my mom's doctor said to her when we reversed her diabetes 6 years ago. And she was at least open-minded enough and clever enough as a doctor that she said, how the hell did you do this? What the hell did you do? This doesn't happen. I want to know what you did, because no one has ever done this, right? I mean, people have, but it doesn't really happen. She told her about, the work I was doing and my thoughts on it. And she was like, okay, I'd really like to know more about this. We had a long conversation. She started applying this to her patients. She started getting the same results. And now we have clinical trials in humans showing that you can absolutely reverse type 2 diabetes by putting people on a high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diet. And now it's happening in the tens of thousands in clinical settings, and we're publishing this data as well. So diabetes is not a disease. It's carbohydrate toxicity. And basically it's food poisoning. You're getting bad food is poisoning your body, and you're getting the manifestations of that poison. So that's sort of my main bent and goal now as a doctor, is to try to educate people and get this information out there so that you don't need doctors. You don't need me to give you medications or anything like that. You can just be healthy. And then doctors can get back to doing what doctors are supposed to be doing, which is dealing with what we've been dealing with for thousands of years, which is accidents and emergencies, childbirth and delivery, congenital and genetic defects and changes, and infectious disease and toxicities. We're basically the mainstay of what we're doing is toxicities, but should be incidental toxic exposures like a snake bite, a spider bite,
Right.
Some weird lead paint or something like that gets in your soup for some reason. All these other sorts of weird accidents, not just this chronic, progressive, ongoing disease that affects the entire world. 90% of the issues that doctors treat nowadays in Western countries are these so-called chronic diseases. 90% of the deaths are from these chronic diseases. 74% of the deaths around the world are from these chronic diseases. If you just change people's diets, the large majority of those go away, and the entire world benefits from this. People live longer, they're healthier, they're happier, they're more productive, they're stronger members of the community. They can be more productive in the economy. Everybody wins. It's a win-win-win situation. So that's sort of my mission now, is to get that out there.
Big food and big pharma don't win, though. That's a problem.
You know, yeah, and that's the thing, and so that's who we're fighting at the moment. You know, the big
Hmm.
pharma. They had there was a slide from a Goldman Sachs meeting that got leaked that said asked the question: is it a viable business model to cure someone of disease? And of course, the
Yeah.
answer is no, because
Hmm.
if you can only cure them once. You give them a pill or something, and it's gone now. Well, then that's it. You know, a patient cured is a customer lost. Whereas if you treat the symptoms and you help them manage that disease, well, that they can manage that disease the rest of their now much shorter and more miserable life. But when you consider the fact that for Harvard School of Public Health, they published data on just 5 chronic diseases. So diabetes, type 1 and type 2, cancer, cardiovascular disease, COPD, and mental health disorders. Just
Hmm.
those 5. So, I mean, autoimmunity and all these other sorts of things are hugely expensive and a very large burden. Just those 5. They found that in 2010, worldwide, we spent $7.5 trillion, trillion with a T, on the direct and indirect costs. But that's going up to almost $14 trillion by 2030, which is not that far away.
Hmm.
And then they looked at it from other angles as well. They looked at it from the lost opportunity cost, people that are sick, they're having sick days, they're on, disability leave, all these other sorts of things. So they're not being able to be active members in the economy. And the world economy took a $46 trillion hit in that 20-year time frame between 2010 and 2030, or is expected to. And then the biggest cost was the premature deaths, the cost to the economy from premature deaths. So people having a heart attack and dying in their 30s, someone having a major stroke or some sort of uh, you know dying from the complications of diabetes or multiple sclerosis, or well, not multiple sclerosis, but COPD, because they weren't looking at MS in this study. But
Hmm.
so just those 5 chronic diseases and the deaths that happen and what that loss of the economy and the impact that would have from losing them for the rest of what would have been their life, that was estimated to be around $23 trillion in 2010 alone. And it's going to go up to nearly $43 trillion a year, each and every year in 2030. So you're talking about losing $60 trillion from the economy that could be going into much more useful directions. I mean, that's going to sink any system on earth. I mean, screw healthcare system. It'll sink government institutions. It's just going to sink entire societies. And the amount of money that we're spending on this and then losing from the economy is just staggering.
Yeah.
And so the big food companies, they make several $1 trillion a year selling us this poison.
Yeah.
And then the pharmaceutical companies and the medical establishment makes tens of trillions of dollars, um, well, 10 to 14 trillion dollars a year, treating all these problems. But
Hmm.
the added cost to that is another $43 trillion in early deaths, and another 2, 3, 4 trillion dollars a year in lost opportunity costs. So it's a losing equation. So they're making X trillions, but we're losing far more
Yeah.
from the damage that's causing us. So whether they like it or not, we have to change it. And the thing is that when you do change something, the great thing about a free market economy is that, okay, well, that's where the market's shifting. We don't need that anymore. They're going to have to pivot, and they don't pivot, they go away. Good riddance. You can't pivot and you can't provide something beneficial to people and not just help people limp along and cover up the symptoms of a disease instead of curing a disease. You deserve to go away. But people, I mean, there's still use for medicine. I still prescribe medications. I still use traditional allopathic methods, and there will always be a need for that. It's just going to be in a different direction. And
Hmm.
so they're going to need to pivot. If they are trying to hold still, then we just need to get this out to as many people as possible so they're healthy and they're thriving. And then if they're too brittle, then they'll break, and good riddance at that point.
Hmm.
Hey guys, just a quick reminder about GlucoCut Plus, my specially formulated supplement to support your metabolism throughout your fat loss journey. With patented ingredients, it aids in consistent weight loss and boosts energy by supporting your thyroid, burning fat, and maintaining lean muscle mass. You know, weight loss can stress your body, but I created GlucoCut Plus to have your back. Visit dr.ashleywellness.com and use code Ashley10 for 10% off your first purchase or 20% off your first subscription order with free shipping. Plus, enjoy a 30-day money-back guarantee. Back to the show.
So the answer is for us to go back to our species-specific diet. And according to your research, that's the carnivore diet. So for someone new to the carnivore diet, what can we eat? What should we be eating? And are there some better veggies than others, or really do we just need to wipe out veggies altogether?
Well, yes. So that's the thing is, some things are better than others. I mean, obviously, like I said, there's 400,000, nearly 400,000 plant species in the world that we know of. Nearly every single one of those will kill you or make you extremely sick. So those are obviously worse, but then there's other ones that, we aren't as bad that you can sort of eat straight. There's some that we eat that we have to actually treat in certain ways. Like you have to ferment it. Fermentation process we've been using for thousands of years to lower the toxic load and open up the bioavailability of many of the nutrients. And so that's very important. That's what ruminant animals like cow, bison, and sheep do, is they have a foregut that ferments that plant material first, and then they absorb now much more nutritious feed. And also they break down fiber into fat and proteins. That's a big thing that people don't realize as well, that cows and herbivores, they eat grass and plants, but what they absorb is fat and protein. And that's what all animals need, is fat and protein. So that's a major one, that plants don't really have fat and protein. Humans aren't able to convert plant tissue into animal tissue or into fat and protein. So it's very difficult to extract the nutrients you need. Some other plants that we eat, but bitter cassava, that will kill you. It has so much cyanide in it if you eat it straight. So they have to have special chemical treatments and different traditional ways of treating it that lower that cyanide load. Things like corn used to never be eaten straight. It was never eaten on the cob. The people in Mesoamerica, they would prepare it. It was like a 7-stage treatment process called nixtamalization, where they would crush it up, expose it to other chemicals like lye and other things, and this would lower the toxic load and bring out more available nutrients. So through technology, we've been able to figure out how to more safely eat plants in times of privation, but it's not ever going to be optimal, not in our lifetime anyway. Maybe in hundreds of thousands of years if we go in that direction. But it's through technology we've been able to make more plants safer to eat. Like beans have tons of lectins. If you ate like raw red kidney beans, it could kill you. As little as 5 red kidney beans eaten uncooked or undercooked have put people in the hospital, and that's according to the WHO. There's a whole page on the WHO, and the WHO is no friend to the meat diet, but they have a whole page about called natural toxins in food. And so it's all the different foods that we eat and all the different toxins that exist in them, and not a single mention of any toxin in meat. So it's all in plants or in mushrooms or in algae, which can then get into seafood and things like that, but it's the algae that's poisonous. And so, yes, some things are better than others, but all plants have toxins, and all plants have some ability to defend themselves. And so if you are eating those plants, some people are going to have a bit more defenses against it. People from European descent or certain parts of Asia or North Africa, parts of Mesoamerica, they would have been exposed to certain plants for several thousand years. But while they would have built up some defenses towards these toxins, it's certainly not complete. And so that's why you see disparities, these health outcomes. So people of European descent have certain rate of diabetes and heart disease and cancer, but people from other ethnic backgrounds like Native Americans, it's far higher rates of these chronic diseases, diabetes, and so forth, because they were hunter-gatherers up until 150 years ago. And then we wiped out the bison population, especially in Central North America. That was the mainstay of their diet and nutrition. and now they don't have it anymore. It was just this hard line push over into post-agricultural society. And in the fossil record, everywhere you look and when you look, when a population went from pre-agricultural to a post-agricultural society, there was a sharp decline in the height, brain size, and health of those skeletons. They usually drop by about 5 or 6 inches. The brain size dropped by 11% for men and 17% for women. That's immediate. That doesn't take hundreds of years or thousands of years. That was overnight, every time in every place that people moved to agriculture, regardless of the type of crop they moved to. They also had signs of poor wound healing, poor dentition, smaller jaws, crooked teeth, which is not genetic. That's actually a nutritional deficiency that's been proven in by Weston A. Price, and also in dentistry journals now, they talk about how this is not genetic, this is nutritional deficiencies that specifically coming from more of the fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin K2 that only exists in animal fat, doesn't exist in plants. And so you're not eating enough fatty meat, you're going to get crooked teeth. And so in those populations, when you see that sharp decline in health, we saw that, and we're seeing that in real time with the Native Americans, the Native Australians. We're seeing this right now with the Maasai. There's certain tribes that are transitioning and starting to eat more post-agricultural food. There's Coca-Cola trucks coming into these remote villages. Sometimes the only way you can get mail or get supplies shipped in are on the Coca-Cola trucks, are the only ones that actually are having, roots in there. So it's pretty crazy, but they're starting to get modern diseases, start getting these diseases of civilization, which is what anthropologists call this. When you transition from pre-agriculture to post-agriculture, they go from having certain health issues like accidents, injuries, infectious disease, to then getting the majority of the issues are these diseases of civilization, which are these chronic diseases or really toxicities and malnutrition. And that's what the Maasai are seeing right now. We're seeing that in real time. So I think the best thing to do is just eat meat. Eat what we've been eating for millions of years, and you're just eating a high-fat meat and water diet. That's the best, and especially ruminant meat, because like I said, the ruminant animals are able to ferment and break down those toxins better. So even when they're being fed grain and things that they're not supposed to eat, they're better able to break that down and lower the toxic load so it doesn't get into the meat. So that's better for most people. But really, it's just eat any meat that you enjoy, that makes you feel the best, and that you can afford and have access to. And
What
the most
about
important
fish?
fish, definitely. Yeah. Any animal, any animal that we
No
would get.
dairy, though.
Dairy is a bit of a gray area. Usually people do great with butter, but dairy has a lot of really good nutrients, but it doesn't have complete nutrition. You do need other things as well. But it's also a very big difference between raw dairy and pasteurized dairy. But it also has something called casomorphins, which are chemicals that actually trigger a hunger response and want, the little baby mammal wants to drink more and more and more. So it compels them and encourages them to eat more and to grow faster. So it can actually cause us to overeat as well. And so this is actually why farmers used skim milk, which was a byproduct of a waste product, really, of the butter and cream industry, that they would give that to pigs. And they found that the combination of grains and skim milk, the combination of that would cause them to overeat more than each one individually. Carbohydrates will make you overeat because it raises your insulin, and that blocks leptin, which is our satiety hormone, so we don't know when we're done eating, and drops your blood sugar, so then you feel tired and you want to eat again. But also these casomorphins, which are in milk, trigger this eat response. And so you just eat more and more and more. And so when people are trying to lose weight, especially, dairy is one of those things that it's a good idea to cut out, because it's a classic weight loss stall. And it's one of those things that you can keep eating more and more. If you're just eating what you're designed to eat, like every animal on earth, your internal mechanisms and signals should tell you how much to eat and when to stop. And if you're eating carbohydrates, it'll change your hunger signals, like I mentioned. And if you're eating dairy, it'll also do that with the casomorphine. So if you're only eating meat, you can listen to your hunger signals. If you add in dairy, unfortunately, you might overeat, and often people do. And then the carbohydrates and milk, you really want to avoid for that same reason that you want to avoid the grains, because it raises insulin, drops your blood sugar, blocks leptin, all these sorts of things will cause you to overeat. it also, when your insulin is up, your metabolism is down. Insulin forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells. And so if your insulin gets high enough, you cannot burn fat. And so you want to keep that insulin down at a normal level. More importantly, besides just locking in your fat cells, insulin affects over 100 different mechanisms in your body, in your physiology, and your metabolism. So it's really important to keep that at normal levels. And when you elevate it with carbohydrates, then all of these other mechanisms are out of balance. This is actually the stem of a lot of chronic diseases that we talk about, which again, they're not diseases. It's just you're poisoning yourself and your body mechanics aren't working properly. So I think one of the most important things is what not to eat as opposed to what to eat. So what to eat, you just eat meat until it stops tasting good. And you do that, at least once a day. And if you're trying to put on weight, try to do it twice a day. But then what not to eat. So my hard rule for myself is no plants or mushrooms, no sugar or any sweeteners, and nothing artificial. And that will go for sauces, seasonings, and drinks as well. So that's if you want to do it really, really strict and really pure. And that is where I see, people get the best results. But, if you want to add in something, you can do that. The idea behind this sort of diet is an elimination diet. And so you're eliminating out all these possible harms. And then you can add some back in. If you think that you might do well with, a bit of spinach or lettuce or a tomato or something like that, give it 30 days, give it 90 days, get it out of your system, see how you feel, and then add it back in and see how you feel. I guarantee you will see a difference. And I don't like that difference, so I don't touch this stuff. Certain things are worse. The different things that we have to chemically prepare, obviously they have more toxins in them. And depending on how you prepare them, you're going to get different amounts of that toxic load out of there. Nightshades are definitely ones to avoid. So that's potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, and capsicums, peppers. I would avoid anything with carbohydrates, any grains, seeds, nuts, beans, legumes, because those are a plant's baby. A seed is a plant's baby, and everything protects its babies more than anything. And so that's where you typically find the highest concentration of toxins. If you're going to have fruit, people say, well, plant wants you to eat fruit because it wants to move your seed. Well, it wants something to eat fruit, not necessarily you. A lot of these fruits and berries have co-evolved with other birds and animals that are specially designed and adapted to eat those fruits. A cassowary bird is a tropical bird. They eat 150 different fruits and berries. They're frugivores. They only eat fruits and berries. And every single one of those fruits will kill you. Every single one of those fruits will kill every single animal except the cassowary bird, because those seeds won't germinate unless they go through the digestive tract of the cassowary bird. And so it's very important for the plant to be very attractive to the cassowary bird and very detrimental to anything else trying to eat it, because that is its baby. That's the next generation. And so if a cassowary bird leaves an area or dies out, those plants die out. So it's very important that nothing else eats those fruit. And but there's so much more. I mean, we eat grapes, we eat avocados. We say, oh, but those are good for you, right? Those aren't bad. Well, they'll kill cats and dogs, right? So obviously there are toxins in grapes and in avocados. And in fact, there are far more toxins when the fruit is green, because obviously the seed's not ready yet. And so it doesn't want anything eating it. So it has far more toxins. And then as it ripens, the plant actually pulls out the toxins. If you pick it green and let it ripen in a box, those toxins just stay there. They don't just break down and degrade. It has to be pulled out by the plant. And so studies have shown, at least in tomatoes, when you pick them green, they don't actually detoxify in the box. They have the same toxic load when they're green as when they're ripe. And the traditional way of making pasta sauce was you vine ripen them, you dip them in boiling water to blanch them, take off the skin. That's barrier protection. That's where more of the toxins are. And you take the seeds out. And then you boil a living hell out of what's remaining to try to denature a lot of these lectins and toxins that are in there. And now we're telling people, no, you want to eat them fresh and green is fine. That was the traditional folk wisdom, was that green tomatoes are poisonous. I was told that when I was a kid. And now everyone's like, oh, no, it's fine. That's just a wives' tale, raw food, vegan all the way. It's like, no. And when was the last time you got an avocado that was picked ripe at the store? It's never going to happen. We're being told to eat 5 pieces of fruit a day. And so how do you do that year round? You ship it from the equator. You ship it from other countries that are in season, where normally we would only eat fruit locally in season. They're available for a couple weeks, and that's it. And then you don't have them. You're not getting these in northern Norway in December. I'm sorry. Like, it's not natural for you to be eating 5 kiwis a day and a mango. That doesn't make any sense. And in order to get those kiwis and mangoes up to Norway without spoiling, they have to be picked green. So now you're having 4 or 5 times the number of toxins that are in there, and a whole bunch of sugar that we've, bioengineered these things to have, which are not natural either. So I like to stick really strictly to just fatty meat and water. It's really important to get enough fat. That's the key thing. You need to get 1 to 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. That's important. That's an important ratio. Everyone's different, but that's a sort of a target to aim for, and then adjust for your own body. And I really avoid everything else. I feel much better without spices, without seasonings even. And that's just me, but I've been doing this for such a long time that, I know how differently I feel on different kinds of meat. And if I'm eating just, beef all week, I feel better than if I'm eating eggs and bacon and some beef as well. So that's my probably longer version of what you asked, answer to your question.
That's great. What about fiber, gut health? Some people will experience constipation. My husband did probably 30 and then 60 days of carnivore. He had loose stools. What's happening with the gut when we make these changes? And what do you say to people who say, oh my gosh, we need the fiber?
Well, yeah, if you look at animals that eat fiber, the only animals that eat fibrous plants as a mainstay of their diet are able to break down and ferment that fiber. So it's not that animal that uses the fiber. It's the microorganisms that eat the fiber.
Right.
Because no vertebrate animal can actually break down fiber. We don't make cellulase, which is what breaks down cellulose. It's only the microbes that break these things down. So like termites don't even break it down, and they have protozoa in their gut that eat the fiber and then produce short chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated. And then those protozoa die off, and the bug absorbs them as protein. The cows and horses and gorillas, etc., they all do the same thing. So they don't break down the fiber. It's actually the microbes, they're bacteria that eat the fiber, and as a byproduct make saturated fat and then die off, and that becomes protein. So they eat grass and leaves, but what they absorb is saturated fat and protein, usually in about that ratio, 1 to 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. So we don't have that ability, and so we don't have any need of fiber. We used to have that ability. The appendix is a small vestigial organ, may have some sort of use, but it's a vestigial cecum, because in other primates like chimpanzees and gorillas, that appendix is actually a 4-foot long cecum. And that's where all this fiber packs down and ferments and breaks down and turns into saturated fat and protein. So we don't have that ability. We don't do that anymore. And so we can't get an abundance of nutrition from eating fiber. So it's not really good for us. In fact, it's also an anti-nutrient, because fiber can form soluble and insoluble fiber, make a sort of a lattice. And they basically make physical barrier protection between your enzymes that are trying to break down your food and the food itself. So it's not breaking down as much food. And then it's actually a physical barrier between the lumen of your intestine and these nutrients that have been broken down. So you're breaking down less food, so you can't absorb it. And then what you have broken down isn't all getting absorbed. So some studies have shown that as much as 30% of the food you eat gets blocked out from absorption if you're eating that meal with fiber. So it's an anti-nutrient. That's another way that plants defend themselves, is by stopping you from absorbing as many of the nutrients. So things like phytic acid, oxalates, tannins, these bind and denature different vitamins, minerals, and nutrients and proteins and stop you from absorbing them, or protease inhibitors that block protease from getting to the proteins to break those down into amino acids. But just fiber is an anti-nutrient because it just physically blocks the absorption of these nutrients. And then they have to go into your large intestine, and then the bacteria get at it, and you get gas and bloating, and you say, oh, I don't like eating meat because it upsets my stomach. Well, have you tried eating it without fiber? Because I guarantee you it's a very different experience. So you don't need fiber. In fact, you don't want fiber. If you're eating high octane garbage, then sure, blocking out 30% of that garbage from going in your body is probably a good thing. And some of these studies reflect that, where they have someone on a standard American diet, they give them a fiber tablet, and they find, oh, their blood sugar is marginally lower. Great.
Yeah.
Well, if you're blocking out 30% of the carbs you're eating, guess what? You're going to have less carbs in your bloodstream. Or they say, well, look at this, it lowers blood pressure. Oh, someone tried to send me this meta-analysis showing that it was good for blood pressure and helped with cardiometabolic diseases and specifically blood pressure. But they tried to dress it up as something fancier. And if you looked at the studies that they used in this meta-analysis, they did drop blood pressure, but it was like by an average of 1.5 points. So you have somebody who has a blood pressure of 170 and you drop that down to 168.5. Like, I'm sorry, that's nothing to write home about. You're still on medication. You're still a stroke risk. You're still in trouble. So yeah, sorry, you can say, yeah, fiber in that situation with that diet help drop your blood pressure, but it didn't do it to any significant clinical degree. And so those studies are now meta-analysis. Fiber helps drop blood pressure. It's something in statistics. You look at these studies that go into a meta-analysis. You say, it's a meta-analysis, the best of the best. No, what makes a good quality meta-analysis is the quality of the studies used in that meta-analysis. And if those studies suck, then the meta-analysis sucks. It's called garbage in, garbage out. The studies on fiber they're garbage. They're garbage studies. And, the problem with medicine, even though it is my field, like I actually have a scientific background. My father was a research physicist at the Lawrence Laboratory at University of Berkeley. He was on Louis Alvarez's Nobel Prize winning physics team, developing the bubble chamber and cracking the atom. Like, I understand how this is supposed to work. And I understand that the large majority of studies in medicine are junk. They are garbage.
Especially nutrition. It's terrible.
So bad. And so animal nutrition, those studies are great. But you can get genetically similar populations. You get 500 head of cattle that have, similar parents and genetics. You get 500 here, change one thing and see the difference. That's actually robust science. But we ignore all of the lessons that we've learned from animal nutrition, which I think are really interesting to go into, like the fact that you get these diseases that come from eating the wrong sort of feed. But yeah, so they're junk. The studies looking at fiber and saying that they're so great are junk. They're just junk studies, junk science. They're really not worth the paper that they're written on. And there are other studies. There were studies with over 2,000 patients that actually showed that people that ate more fiber had more heart attacks and strokes. They died more. So that's not good. What about a controlled trial with human participants that had symptomatic constipation and found that if you split them up into 4 groups, one that had the same amount of fiber, and then one added more fiber, one reduced fiber, one eliminated fiber, they found that it shook out exactly the opposite of what we are told that it would. People that stayed the same, obviously. People that ate more fiber actually got worse, got more symptomatic, got worse constipation. And the people that reduced their fiber improved their bloating, their pain, their constipation. People that eliminated fiber, they all eliminated their symptoms. It went away. So the fiber was the problem there. That's what better studies actually show. So you don't need fiber. In fact, I'd argue you don't want fiber. If you're eating garbage, then sure, blocking out 30% of that garbage is probably okay. But if you're not eating hot garbage, well, then you don't want to block out the absorption. You want all those nutrients. You don't want that anti-nutritive effect. So when I eat a steak, I want all that steak in my body. Your question about constipation, that's an important one. It's funny. Some people say, well, you're going to get constipated without fiber. Then all these people say, you're going to get diarrhea if you go on carnivore. Which one is it? It's one or the other, right? Well, it has to do, it can be with your microbiome as that's switching over, but that typically takes a few days, few weeks for that to switch over. But more commonly, it's you've gotten rid of fiber, and now these little things that you're eating, like coffee, because most people drink coffee. Most people continue to drink coffee even when they go carnivore, and now you don't have fiber blocking up and slowing things down, so things move faster. So it has a much stronger laxative effect. If you're only eating meat and you're only drinking water, then it can come down to just the amount of fat that you're eating. So if you're getting constipated, and some people mistake constipation for frequency, which is not the actual medical definition of constipation. Constipation is about the consistency. So is it dry, hard, pebbly, rocky, difficult to pass stools? That's constipation, according to the Bristol stool chart. So just eating meat, you're going to absorb 98% of the meat that you eat. So obviously there's very little is going to come out. You're eating a plant, 95% of that's fiber, 95% has to come out, right? So if you're just eating meat, you're going to go far less often. It's going to be a far smaller volume. So it's very common that people will only need to go to the bathroom once or twice a week and have a very small amount that comes out. And that's because you're not eating fiber, and you don't need to eat fiber because you just waste. It's just a waste product. It just goes out, right? But if you're eating fat, then you won't get constipated. You won't get those dry, hard stools because your body has a limited capacity to absorb fat. This is another thing. People say, well, okay, well, you need to eat some fat. You don't want to eat too much fat because that'll make you fat. There's no such thing because you cannot physically absorb the fat. You can absorb fat with bile. So we make bile out of our liver, but it's a slow process. You make about 0.8 liters a day, depending on the size of the person. And that is what you need to emulsify and absorb fat through your lymphatics. You can absorb some fat without bile, usually MCTs, medium chain triglycerides. You can absorb those just more normally, not through your lymphatics. But the rest of it has to go with your bile. So after you run out of bile, and you will because you're only making 0.8 liters a day, then you physically can't absorb fat past some of the MCTs. So it just goes out. And that excess fat is what actually keeps your stool soft. And since fat repels water, it goes into your colon. Your colon's supposed to desiccate and dehydrate your stools. That's what it's supposed to. You're keeping that water so that you're not wasting all this water. You need water. The animals die of dehydration all the time. So, we're saying, well, you need fiber because you need to move it fast through and get it past this evil colon that's trying to steal all the water from it and make it hard. Like, that's its job. Why are we fighting our own biology and anatomy? That's what it's supposed to do. If it has enough fat in it, it can sit in your colon until Christmas. It's never going to get drier than it already is, and it'll stay soft. And so if you have enough fat, and what I mean by fat is you're eating as much fat as your body has the capacity to absorb, and then a little bit extra. So you've saturated your body's ability to absorb fat and then some. So you have a bit of spillover, so it's full. Then that bit of spillover is what's going to keep your stool soft. Now, if you eat a lot more fat than your body can absorb, well, then you're going to get diarrhea. That's the old saying. I heard it when I was a kid. I hardly come across anybody else who's heard it, but quicker than fat through a goose. I don't know why I only heard this and no one else has, but if you give a goose like a big chunk of fat, it'll be out of them in minutes. And so, you just can't absorb it. And so if you can't absorb the fat, it goes through you. Do you remember like back in the 90s, they had the Olean chips, like they had Olestra. Yeah. That fake fat that we couldn't physically absorb. Right. So it's like, oh, you can eat all the fat that you want, but you can't absorb it. Great. And then it came off the market because people were getting loose stools or getting diarrhea. And so they had to put that warning label on the bottom of the chips, which is just the death knell for them, which was may
Leaky
cause
butt.
anal leakage.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, yeah, sounds great, So that was over, before it started, but that's what it does. So when you have enough fat and a little bit extra, you'll keep it soft. If you have a lot more, then you'll get loose stools. The converse of that is that you can become so constipated that you get blocked up in sort of a pseudo obstruction, and then the liquid stool from your small intestine can actually push around the outsides, and you get watery diarrhea intermixed with every few days. You get this hard, horrible constipated stool, and that's called overflow diarrhea or spurious diarrhea. And that means that you're so constipated that you're approaching a blockage, and you really need to ramp up the amount of fat that you're eating. So if you're ever constipated, by definition, you're not eating enough fat. If you're eating way too much protein as well, that can cause sort of watery stool. So it's sort of a U-shaped curve. It's too little fat, you'll get diarrhea. Too much fat, you can also get loose stools as well. So you want to get that Goldilocks amount of fat and just the just right one.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, listening, or watching the first part of my interview with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. I hope that you enjoyed learning from his insights on toxins in plants, the carnivore diet, and how chronic diseases can often be reversed with just dietary changes. I love this. Because there was just so much valuable information shared in this entire interview, we decided to split it up into two parts. So please stay tuned with us because part 2 is coming very soon. In that episode, we're going to be diving in even deeper into the impacts of carbs, more specifically on the carnivore diet, and provide you lots more practical tips to apply in your life. So in the meantime, if you are watching this on YouTube, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on that notification bell so that you do not miss part 2. So thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next episode. Remember, you've got to step up to make the change. Lead with your heart, train your mind, and do not negotiate with your body. I'll see you in the next episode.